Today, we're going to talk about ethics of data sharing. There are good reasons why researchers should share their data with others. Existing research data can be used to answer questions beyond those planned in the original study, to analyze outcomes that were not included in the primary analysis, to enable individual participant data meta-analysis, and to investigate new methodologies for analyzing data. In addition, sharing allows for transparency as published results can be independently validated. It is cheaper and more efficient to use existing data than to collect additional data, and it puts fewer patients at risk. Funders and publishers have updated their policies to encourage or require data sharing at the participant level, and there is an increasing pressure to share data. But what are the benefits of data sharing? There are a number of benefits of data sharing, and among those is an increased contribution to generalizable knowledge. It means that in a single clinical trial, it often aims to answer a limited set of questions like efficacy, how it compares with placebo or the current standard, and side effects. But sharing an analysis of clinical data will help uncover additional findings beyond the original specified clinical trial outcomes. Data sharing provides a more comprehensive picture on the benefits and risks of a therapy. Another benefit of data sharing is better evidence for clinical care. Armed with better evidence on the safety and effectiveness, healthcare professionals and patients are able to make more informed decisions about clinical care, thus an improved clinical care and public health in the long run. As such, this will lead to the reduction of the incidence of adverse effects and less expenditures for interventions that are ineffective or less effective than alternatives. Data sharing also provides a deeper knowledge base for regulatory decisions. This is especially true for rare diseases, where a well-powered randomized controlled trial can be difficult to conduct. Data sharing also leads to enhanced efficiency and safety of future trials. Sharing of clinical research data among different stakeholders will greatly enhance the efficiency and safety of future clinical research process by reducing unnecessary duplication of effort and the costs of future studies, and also reducing the exposure of participants in future trials to avoid harms identified through the data sharing. Data sharing also accelerates scientific progress. In accelerating scientific progress, it opens up opportunities for exploratory research, such as new hypotheses about the mechanisms of disease, more effective therapies, and alternative uses of existing or abandoned therapies that could then be tested in additional research. However, there are still a lot of risks in clinical data sharing. What are the ethical risks of clinical data sharing? The potential benefits of sharing clinical trial data and the risks of not sharing need to be weighed against any potential harms from sharing. First, data sharing could put clinical trial participants at increased risk of invasions of privacy or breaches of confidentiality. As a result, participants could suffer social or economic harms. Data sharing also could result in potential harms to society. For example, shared clinical trial data might be analyzed in a manner that would lead to distorted effect estimates or incorrect conclusions, although this could also occur with the original analysis. Another example, if multiple secondary analyses are carried out in an attempt to establish serious adverse effects, but statistical analysis do not take this multiple analysis into account, some apparent adverse effects may be identified on the basis of chance alone. A potential consequence is that invalid analysis will lead to claims of risk that are not scientifically valid, which may in turn lead to lawsuits for negligence that, while without merit, are expensive to respond to and defend against. Tied with this risk are the different ethical issues in data sharing and how stakeholders can respond to them. First is respect for persons, or respect for individuals whose data has been shared. Data sharing may compromise the privacy and confidentiality of research participants, especially if efforts of aggregation is not sufficient. This is true for participant subgroups who are in a vulnerable position, such as those with stigmatizing condition of mental health. But how do we uphold the principle of respect for persons? First and foremost, research participants should be protected by obtaining their valid informed consent. It means continuously sharing information with participants and obtaining their ongoing consent or concurrence throughout the trial. It also means that the overall results of the trial should be in the language that they could understand, and they should also be informed of sharing data with the research community. Furthermore, we should protect the confidentiality and privacy of trial participants. In vulnerable populations, it is justifiable to handling some types of clinical trial data differently with respect to sharing so as to reduce the potential for unfair treatment of participants. Under respect for persons is community engagement. Different cultures and communities may understand data sharing differently. In places with an equal power distribution, this may render the population more vulnerable. Community engagement is important in identifying its unappreciated benefits and risks that were not previously taken into account. Through community engagement, representatives of such communities and groups can provide insight into the cultural and societal values and concerns pertinent to sharing of clinical trial data. It also allows participants or their advocates to suggest how the data sharing process might be improved. Community engagement also allows sponsors and researchers to communicate the rationale of data sharing in an accessible and understandable manner. It finally builds public trust in the value and importance of data sharing in the long run. Another principle in data sharing is justice. It means fairness, which requires similar treatment of people, whether as individuals or as part of groups or entities, unless there are justifiable reasons to treat them differently. It also means equitable distribution of the benefits of clinical research across different groups of participants and different communities. Patients from certain ethnic groups or with rare diseases may not benefit from normal clinical trials due to low recruitment. Pooling of shared data from several clinical trials could benefit these groups of patients. Pooling of data also enables researchers to draw valid inferences about risks and benefits of the trials. The last principle to be discussed is beneficence. It means maximizing benefits of clinical trials and minimizing risks of sharing clinical data. One way to ensure beneficence is through scientific validity. Just like any kinds of analysis, methods and statistics used to analyze shared data should be scientifically valid to prevent biased conclusions. Otherwise, this may lead to seriously flawed clinical care decisions, unwarranted patient concerns about the quality of care, or avoidable patient anxiety. Clinical researchers who know that others will be using their data may be more thorough and more careful in their methodology and its documentation. This increases the usefulness and trustworthiness of clinical trial data and analysis of the data and reduce bias in the data and findings. Facilitating secondary analysis also could determine whether the final conclusions and summaries of clinical trials are robust, valid inferences from the original evidences. There are different stakeholders in clinical data sharing. These are the IRB, the public, participants, the researchers, the funders, and the sponsors. But how do the different stakeholders support data sharing without compromising ethical issues? First is the IRB or IC. It's an independent body composed of medical and non-medical members whose duty is to ensure the protection of the rights, safety, and well-being of human subjects in a trial and to provide assurance of that protection. To support data sharing without compromising ethical issues, the IRB may consider its approach for practical application of the principles to the issues entailed in sharing clinical data. If each principle were to be given equal weight, this may have issues that are unresolvable due to the conflict it may cause. For example, the principle of maximizing benefits to society would conflict with the principle of respecting participants in addressing the issue of whether participants should be given the opportunity to opt out of data sharing in the consent process. To develop this approach, the IRB needs to return to the original question posed in the framework document. To whom do the benefits of clinical trial data belong? The benefits of clinical trial data could be regarded as belonging primarily to the public, where the data benefit patients and the public through the advancement of science and clinical knowledge that leads to improved patient care. From this perspective, some might argue that sharing clinical trial data ought to be a prima facie obligation, that is, the default policy, the presumption that should be sharing with justification needed to restrict or recognize an exception to share. Another stakeholder is the public. Public trust is an intrinsic value undergirding the biomedical science and health research enterprise, which is fundamentally aimed at improving human health. At a more instrumental level, trust also is essential for ensuring continued public support for clinical research and for fostering participation in clinical trials. The concept of public trust in clinical trials encompasses trust both in the scientific process of generating the data and in the validity of the trials. Sharing of clinical trial data could either enhance or reduce public trust in clinical research. The process used for data sharing should therefore be undertaken in a manner that enhances public trust both in the clinical trial process and the data sharing process. The next stakeholders are the participants. Respect for research participants requires protecting their dignity, integrity, and right to self-determination. This includes, at a minimum, compliance with applicable regulations and ethical standards for the conduct of clinical trials and handling of the resulting data. Respect for research participants has historically been understood to require specific informed consent from participants, including consent for how their data will be used, before they enroll in a clinical trial in which the interventions will be carried out at the individual participant level. Respect also suggests a need to protect the confidentiality and privacy of trial participants when data are shared. For example, additional protections may be needed when participant identifiers cannot be removed from data or must be included in shared data in order to address an important research question. Let's continue with the other stakeholders and how they support data sharing without compromising ethical issues. Researchers. Researchers develop data management and data sharing policies as part of research protocol. They must be prepared to share experimental data with editors, peer reviewers, and other researchers in accordance with journal policies. They should also apply the shortest possible embargoes on data and should also respect original author by giving credit where credit is due. Next are the funders. Funder means a person or organization which funds the conduct of clinical trials. Funders are not always study sponsors. They require that researchers develop data management plans as part of research proposals. They also establish data sharing policies for funded studies. They also establish data sharing eligibility for other researchers who wish to request for data access. They support technical solutions that enable researchers to easily discover, access, and reuse the data. They establish trusted and equitable systems for data access governance in lower to middle income countries, which may include terms that require users to contribute to training and capacity development or to share the resulting outcomes. They also build partnerships with and between data sharing initiatives, trusted repositories, and peer-reviewed journals committed to data sharing. The belief among researchers for funders is that publication is the only measure of success and are thus unwilling to publish data as they think they will lose publication opportunities. Grant funders should re-examine their grant application process to see how it can shift the emphasis from publications to a wider set of outputs, like antibodies, cell lines, reagents, patents, datasets, softwares, and materials. Lastly, we have the sponsors. Sponsor means a person who takes responsibility for and initiates a clinical investigation. The sponsor may be an individual or pharmaceutical company, a governmental agency, an academic institution, a private organization, or other organizations. They establish data sharing policy or process and data sharing eligibility. They also build partnerships with and between data sharing initiatives, trusted repositories, and peer-reviewed journals committed to data sharing. All these stakeholders should reduce as many obstacles as possible on data and ensure that data access is subject to a proportionate review, like the scientific rationale and qualifications of the research team, without introducing unnecessary barriers. In conclusion, balancing the requirement of anonymization with the need for data utility is not always easy to achieve. The practicality of the anonymization process should remain a high priority. Going forward, we will become more adept at recognizing the types of data that regularly occur within our trials and how this should be best handled for data sharing, perhaps via an automated process. However, there will always be an unusual cases within each trial which may mean full automation is not possible. Data sharing is a balance of mitigating risk against encouraging good use. No system is perfect, but it is imperative that we develop this aspect of trial reporting in order to progress towards a fully compliant and robust end to end process.